Hello, friends. Give me just a second. Be there in a jiffy. Whoops. There we go. All right. Hello. Hello, faithful YouTube friends. I'll wait just a minute to get my Facebook friends up and running. In the meantime, I can just start painting, can't I? Around here somewhere, I have some brushes with blue paint on them, pale blue paint on them. So at the moment, as you can see, I'm doing a painting that would not be classified as a portrait, but the friend of mine who has hired me responded with this painting and said, yes, I'd love for you to do a portrait of my, I don't know what the relationship is, niece, daughter, friend, neighbor, I don't know, daughter-in-law, neighbor's daughter-in-law's friend, perhaps. Anyway, so it's actually very much a landscape, of course, with a figure in it. It's a landscape painting with a figure in it, but at the moment, I'm being paid, if you will, to do a portrait of the young lady. So happy to do that. I mean, my offer was to do portraits at this rock bottom price, which I called my coronavirus special. And this particular episode, as you may have seen, I have called The Magic of Real Painting. And the word real is in quotation marks, and you will see why. Anybody arrogant, of course, enough to to call what they're doing real painting. And so that requires some explanation, doesn't it? All right, let's get official. You Facebook people who are new with us, I've only been doing Facebook for the last week or so, week and a half, other than going back 3 years. Anyway, so this is part of our shtick, Daily Art Adventure number, what? 873. Woohoo! The magic of real painting. Now let me see if I've got a monitor coming up. No, I don't yet. So that'll be coming in a minute, I am sure. There we go. All right, now I'll be able to see the chats. I sure hope we have a better, a stronger feed than we did yesterday. We had some real problems with internet speed. My guess is everybody's home in the neighborhood, and they're all sitting at home watching Netflix or something. So our internet speed has been quite slow here lately. Anyway, as soon as you make a comment, I should be able to see it, I think. Come on. There we go. Oh, I saw it just a second. Hello, Wendy Spivey Shelley and Sonia Kane. Oh my goodness. And Mark Barber. Oh boy, all kinds of interesting people. And Michael McEwen. Okay, what I'm painting is, here's my reference, right? That my client sent to me. It's a picture of a girl on the beach, and I'll try to set up my my photo so that you can see both at the same time. All right, now I really wish that I had been able to start this broadcast earlier. In the last hour or so, I painted most of this. I have another copy. Ignore the watermark. Ignore that. So here's what I'm trying to imitate, emulate, reflect, and so forth here. And as I was painting it, I was thinking, oh man, I should really be broadcasting this. Thank you, because it was interesting and perhaps would be helpful to some people. So it's too late. I've already done it. I've already done the painting, and I can't go back. But I'm still doing some of what I called real painting. So let me take a minute, and again, it's a very, very dangerous assertion to make, to say that some kind of painting is real. So let me try to gingerly, carefully, cautiously, humbly. Oh, you can't believe the blistering humility that I can manifest sometimes. I'm quite proud of my humility. It's like junior high, we used to call it, junior high level humor, isn't it? When I was painting the sand and grass down here, let me go back to it for a bit. I'm not quite finished. I'm nearly finished with that part of the painting, but not quite. So let's go back to it for a minute. And I'm going to try to talk about, again, what I call real painting. And every time I say this, I have several, the ghosts, so to speak, of several friends. They're not, my friends are not dead, so it's not, but I have, you know, I can imagine several of my friends standing over my shoulder saying, oh yeah, that's so smarty pants. Because I'm going, once again, I'm going to defend a certain kind of painting, a certain style, if you will. But before I do that, I want to give, it's been quite a while since I've described my philosophy, if you will. That's too deep a word, because I don't really mean philosophy, but close enough. The way ordinary people typically use the word philosophy. That was my philosophy of painting. Okay, so before I continue painting, I'm going to take a minute. Let me find a piece of scrap paper over here. Usually I have lots of scrap paper in my wastebasket. That's one thing I seem to be pretty good at, is producing trash. All right, and a marker, blue marker, that'll do. All right, you ready? I've got a stack of paper here so that the ink doesn't go through my paper onto my painting. All right. This is, again, very foundational to my thinking. I'm going to take a few minutes to describe what I think is good painting. This is a diagram. I contend, until I'm convinced otherwise, and I've been speaking this for about 13 years, that the painting and drawing, but I'll stick with paint, the painting that moves human beings the most is that which pulls together two contrasting dynamics, principles, elements, okay? And those two contrasting elements are, and these words are meaningless to you until I define them, so bear with me. I will define them here in a bit. History and meaning. Now, some of you old-timers, you may have, I've done this many times over the years, but it's been quite a while since I've done it on my broadcast, so. The painting that pleases and moves human beings the most. Now, let me, a quick caveat. I am not talking about much of the art of the 20th century that was conceptual, propagandistic, preacherly, message-filled. None of that. I'm only limiting myself to visual art here, not, and most contemporary, modern, what ordinary people call modern art. The reason it's hard to understand is because it's not visual, it's preacherly. It's communication. Okay, so I'm not talking about that. I'm only talking about visual paintings. All right, that doesn't mean realistic. That means the issue is looking at stuff. All right, let me define these terms now real quickly. First of all, what do I mean by history? And I don't mean in 1492 the Crellum sailed the ocean blue or anything like that. What I mean is when there is a clear history of human movement. This is one of the things that all human beings enjoy seeing in a work of art. A clear or manifest or transparent history of human movement. Now, since I've got this little Sharpie marker in my hand right now, I'm going to make a mark. All right, just took me a few seconds to do that. This mark is a very accurate and indelible history of my movements. You're making sense? Does that make sense? Let me do another one right here. Okay, this mark is a remarkably accurate history or reflection of the movements that I made. You can tell that this mark and this mark are done in a very different mood, different style, different kind of movements. Okay, I contend that human beings get a kick out of seeing marks. Let me point at my painting now. Human beings get a kick out of seeing marks on a canvas that are clear, transparent, manifest, obvious. The viewer can say, oh, I can see what happened there. The artist had a brush. The brush was about this or that big. I'll actually make a little mark while I'm doing it. The brush was, this or that large, and it had this or that much paint on it. And the artist took the brush and made a mark like thus and so. Is that making sense? Now, there is a very different way to paint, and I'll show you an example, one of my examples of that in a minute here. There is a very different way to paint, and that is a kind of painting where the human marks have been brushed out, smudged out, smoothed out, diminished, obfuscated. All those words are saying the same thing, okay? But most of the marks that I've made down here and the marks that I just made just now are quite, again, clear, obvious, manifest. They're an easy to read, if you will, history of the movement that I made. An astute observer, a fellow artist, say, could pick up a brush and with just a little bit of study, looking carefully, could reproduce the marks that I'm making quite perfectly, quite accurately. They could copy the very marks that I made. I'm going to mix up a little bit more here, a little bit darker color. Okay. So I contend, again, to be clear, that human beings, by and large, all human beings, trained or otherwise, get a sort of kick out of seeing marks, a history of human movement that they can interpret, that's clear, manifest, and obvious. Before I go into meaning, I'll go ahead and tell you, I think, why this is the case. Why do human beings get a kick out of this? And I think it's because when you see clear, obvious, transparent, manifest, obvious human marks, it's as if in your what's the word I'm looking for? Precognitive lizard brain, if you will. It's as if there's a sign stuck in the painting, if you will. Here's a sign, grass growing around the base of it. And the sign says something like, human being was here. Or more precisely, even, or more importantly than that, it's not simply human was here, but, if you will, the sign says somebody just like me was here. Because when we see marks, again, going down to these marks, when we see marks that are obvious, transparent, manifest, clear, the viewer can tell how they were done, there's a deep sense of connection. Your humanity, so to speak, connects to my humanity, or the viewer's humanity connects with the artist's humanity. We look at those marks and go, ooh, somebody just like me, a creature just like me was here, and they made marks, and I can identify with that, all right? So all of that is just to describe the history end. Let me repeat. I believe that the kind of painting that elicits the deepest aesthetic reaction in the mind of the viewer is that painting which pushes together two opposing forces. All right, so all I've done so far is talk about history, a clear history of human movement. Got it? The other side is, I call meaning. Now, the most ordinary word over here for meaning would be realism. Or accurate rendering or accurate drawing. Accurate, I can just put an R for rendering, or accurate D. Now it looks like research and development. Accurate rendering or drawing. You could even use some other words, might be detail. But or similitude is a more like smarty pants word. Similitude. Okay, if you want to sound smart, instead of realism, say similitude. Okay, so on this end of the spectrum, it's the opposite of raw movement. It's a picture of something. Very simply put, if the artist is drawing a picture of a cow, by golly, the more it looks like a cow, the more pleasure, in a sense. I'm trying to do it like cave of Lascaux, France, drawing of a cow there. The more it looks like a cow, the more this kind of pleasure the viewer experiences. So this is realism. Now, if you're an artist, you instantly see that these two are in opposition to each other, because the more you have of this, the less you have of this. The more you have of this, the less of this. In other words, let me just pick up one of my old paintings that happens to be here on the wall behind me right now and show it to you, because it's an example of, well, it's both, but it's mostly an example of realism kind of painting. Okay? So this is not my typical, this is what I do for fun. Okay? I indeed, and it is fun. I'm serious as I can be. Whoops, we just lost audio. No, okay, it came back. Okay. All right, let me zoom in as far as I can here to the realistic part of this car. You with me? Hello, Betty Funk. Hello, Jennifer Parker. Hello, Treadfall. Good to have you guys watching. Appreciate it. Thanks for speaking up. All right, this is realism. This is similitude, accuracy, detail, and so forth. All right? The first thing you may notice is that there are virtually no brush strokes in here. There's no clear, manifest, transparent history of human movement. That's a lot of words. I think I have a piece of acetate. I do. So there's a piece of acetate on top of my painting right now. If I had painted, say, you can see there's a reflection in this Ford Deluxe. You can even read the letters there. And there's a reflection of the car next to it. And there's a reflection of me, by the way, taking a picture of it. Okay, but there's no marks like this. These marks that I'm doing right now, those are clear, transparent, obvious, manifest. Do you understand? I'm using this different words to say the same thing over and over and over. Does that make sense? So I'm going to mix up the dark purple here and say, okay, so I'm essentially doing the same painting, but now on top of on this plastic, I'm painting it with very clear and obvious history of human movement. You with me? All right, so let me get back. So there's an example. By the way, this painting, and I love doing automotive paintings. I've done a dozen or more, and they're great fun. I wish I sold more of them. As you can tell, I haven't sold this one because here it is in my studio on my wall. I'd rather it be on your wall. But I typically go from very tight, accurate realism to abstract, crazy, loose background. All right. Like there's the top of the hood. It's just a mess. Okay. All right. So this is not an example of what this is just the fact that I've got both on the same canvas. The best painting in the world, in my humble opinion, is that painting in which there is clear, obvious, manifest, transparent, no, let me say that again. Where there is super duper realism rendered by brushstrokes that are clear, obvious, manifest, transparent, or human movement. This is not an example of that because there's virtually no human movement reflected. And you all know, how I did this. How did I do those little lines? I had a little tiny brush. I stuck out my tongue. I was holding the brush, like this. Pardon? I'm going to deliver the two little ones. Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. My wife is delivering paintings for me. How wonderful. Anyway, so I was, took a long time to do that. All right. So, and I enjoy this very much. I really do. I don't think it's the best kind of artwork though. And again, every time I say that, I have dear friends who paint like that all the time, and I like their artwork. So their ghost always haunts me when I make this little speech. I'm looking for the beach scene now. So what I call real painting, and I will admit that there's an element, there's an arrogant overtone in that, because I'm defending, if you will, this style of painting. Now let me use this particular painting as an example of the kind of thing that I am talking about. I want this to look like a dead ringer for weeds and sand. Anybody, if you live in a part of the world where your beaches look like this, and then it goes over the dune and it's beautiful white sand beaches. I want it to look exactly, I would like somebody to look at it and go, golly, that looks exactly like blank, weeds and sand. I'll just say weeds and sand, okay? But you can tell I didn't have a little tiny brush in my hand. I didn't stick out my tongue and go and paint one stalk, then paint another, then paint another, and so on and so forth. Rather, I employed and I'm looking for a part of this painting that, yeah, okay, up here, this is not finished. So I can do a little bit example. I tried to employ human movement, all right? Going back to my diagram, are you with me? I tried to employ brush strokes, if you will, that were clear, obvious, manifest, transparent, easy to interpret brush strokes. And by interpret, I don't mean they look like something. I mean, they look like brush strokes. So I made movements or motions with my hands that, if I can play with the words a little bit, that, oh my goodness, would you look at that? I made these crazy marks, and then it accidentally looks like weeds and sand. So I'm going to do a little bit right now. I don't want to do too much because I'm nearly finished with this part of the painting, and I don't want to overdo it. But there is a section, there's an area up here where it's too it doesn't look realistic, and the marks are not pleasant either. In other words, if you watch me at all, you've heard me talk a lot about interesting marks. The essence of good painting is making interesting marks. Okay, so I'm painting in a rather sedate manner right now, because that's what the subject calls for. One thing, if you're an artist, one thing you might notice about the way I'm painting right now is it's one-touch painting. There was a popular, folks, maybe it still is popular somewhere, but many years ago there was this popular artsy craftsy painting thing called one stroke. And it was, to me as an artist, it was kind of, forgive me, it was kind of cute. I'm sounding condescending there. But it was kind of cute because it was in fact just focusing on one little aspect of good painting, which is that most good painters, most, not all, but most good painters do what I do. All right. So what I want to have appear on, let me do a little bit more in here. By the way, this is just a little piece of rubber. And right on top of some of that orange paint that I just put down, I'm going to, let's mix up a little bit more of that. I'm going to make some dark horizontal marks that will look like more weeds standing up, if you will. Okay, let me do a little bit more. I just mixed up some more of that dark brown. So even the marks that I'm making right now, an astute observer would look and say, oh, look at, the artist used some kind of straight, they would most typically think a palette knife. It turns out it's not a palette knife. It turns out this little piece of rubber thing actually works better on this particular rough canvas than a palette knife would. But close enough, most people would think it's a palette knife. All right, so again, it's very obvious human history of human movement. All right, does that make sense? Now, let me apologize to the ghosts of my friends who are wanting. I'm going to draw this same diagram one more time. Let me see if I can find a cleaner piece of scrap paper. Here we go. This is in deference to all my friends who do hyper-realistic or super-realistic painting. I want to restate, in a sense, everything I just said. The kind of painting that elicits the deepest aesthetic response from the viewer is the convergence. And it's hard to get, if you have a little of this one, you have a lot of this, and vice versa. It's hard to get a lot of both. The answer is not, by the way, a mediocre middle. That's not good painting. Good painting is lots of history of human movement, lots of history, and a lot of meaning crunched together. Okay, in other words, you want to turn this into less of a rectangle and more of a square. All right, but over here is history. Over here is meaning, right? I'm not going to define those again. Here's the good news. Any mark that the artist makes, let me say that again, any mark that the artist makes that serves either one of these objectives, either it's an obvious, interesting mark, beautiful mark, transparent, obvious history mark, or it's super duper, and again, that's not the number 3, that's the number meaning, okay? Or it's super defined, realistic, and accurate. Here's the good news. I'm just going to put a smiley face here. Any mark that fulfills one of those two purposes, in other words, you can have a painting that is 100%, that's an exaggeration, but it's 98% accurate, tight, realistic, like my car that I just showed you a while ago. And it can be, that will elicit pleasure from the viewer. Likewise, or contrary-wise, you can have a painting that is almost all about bold movements. Like I would point to Van Gogh's Starry Night is way over here. By the way, why don't I use the word realism? Or why I didn't say this? Why do I use the word meaning? The reason is I want this to include abstract paintings as well. So that's why I don't call it realism. All the marks in a good abstract painting have meaning. It's just that they are not representational. That's another story. I won't get into it. So, but I should explain. Why don't you just say realism over here? That's why, because I want this diagram to include abstract. So the good news is any painting that fits inside this rectangle can be a good painting, whether it's extremely realistic or extremely energetic. It can be a good painting. Again, my contention, however, and who's my hero? Who's the god of this kind of painting? Well, Rembrandt. You know, other big names, John Singer Sargent, most of the great painters through the ages. I'm not even going to start a list, but anyway. So let me just talk to my fellow painters for a few minutes then. If this is true, then our objective, our hope, our goal, our dream as painters should be to create clear, obvious, manifest. I keep using the word transparent. That is, they're easy to see through. They should be using interesting marks, would be another word. Beautiful marks, free, spontaneous marks, and at the same time, with those free marks, accidentally, if you will, be rendering accurate, believable, realistic objects. Okay, so that is the way I paint. So, and I wish you'd been here when I was doing all this grass, because I was doing all kinds of really wild movement. Let's do some up here in the clouds. I have a little bit more work to do, not much. And then, of course, I'm going to do the portrait, but I'll wait and do this a little bit later. Hello, Gail Knowles. You are correct. Terrible stream. I'm sorry. That's why not very many people are watching. Perhaps on Facebook, because it is so intermittent. I am so sorry. So rather than drawing, so to speak, clouds, I want to devise, if you will, a way of moving. Literally, I mean this literally, a way of moving my hand with a brush in it so that I end up with what looks like clouds, but it also at the same time looks like a free and spontaneous movement of my hand, my body, my arm. Okay? And those two impulses are against each other. If you want it to look exactly like a cloud, then that's really easy to do. You get a little tiny brush, stick out your tongue and start painting like this. And by the way, the internet is absolutely awash with those kinds of artists. I won't name names. and many of them have tens and thousands of times more viewers than I do. Not my job to wonder why or try to fix that. That's just the way it is. It is clearly because there's a wide and deep and long audience for hyper super duper realism, which you could say, well, doesn't that belie your theory? And I don't want to get into arguing. The answer is no, it doesn't. But that's another. I don't want to get that deep. I don't want to sound like I'm arguing with the people. I enjoy doing realism too. It's like it's like fun to me. It's fun in a way that like doing a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle is fun to me. It takes a long time, but it's not difficult. It just takes time. And again, let me talk to you painters, because that's my real desire, is with every object, everything, like at the moment I am drawing the thing I am painting. I actually use the word drawing. The thing I am painting at the moment is clouds. My hope and goal, ambition, is to invent, if you will, movements that will accidentally, that's how it feels, that will accidentally end up looking, golly, those look like clouds. Does that make sense? And yet they're not rendered under the burden of hyper control, is one way to put it. All right, so that I might end this broadcast right there and start another one in a little while, and also see if I can get a better stream on my Facebook feed. I'm terribly sorry about that. I know what you mean, and I think we had terrible internet speed earlier today, and I'm afraid it's back to terrible again. The coronavirus has gotten in our internet, I'm afraid. I think I'm kidding. I hope I'm kidding. I'm trying to kid about something that we probably shouldn't kid about. All right. Does that make sense? I hope it did. I hope it did. Leave if you heard what I said and if you have questions, by all means, leave your comments. I'll certainly try to address them. Very, very few chats on YouTube. I don't know what that means. Some of you guys don't know that you're supposed to say something if you're watching. You don't have to. It's not you're supposed to, but you may, of course. All right. When we come back, I'm very close to finished with all the background of this painting. When we come back, either on this painting or on subsequent, the theme of this week, the last 2 weeks, of course, has been portraits, and we will be back into the realm of portraiture in just a little bit. Now, the rules change slightly, especially if you're not very good, as I am not very good. The rules change slightly when it comes to portrait, because when it comes to portrait, the most important thing is not the history of human movement. The most important thing is accuracy of rendering, that it has to look like the person. But if you're really good at portraiture, which I am not, like the great portrait painters, they manage to still have lots of history of movement. Again, John Singer Sargent would be one of the best known examples of that. He said he's famous for saying, you start with a broom and end with a mop, or start with a mop and end with a broom. I don't remember which one it was. But he was talking about, big movements, big brushes, and so forth. Of course, he wasn't doing a head this size. All right. Oops. Tell you what, before we go, there's supposed to be a bucket down here. Let's do a little bit of bucket painting, shall we? Yes. So once again, my goal is to make marks that I use the term often, accidentally ends up looking like a little blue bucket sitting down here in the sand, as opposed to getting out a little tiny brush. I'm almost finished with the bucket already. As opposed to getting out a little tiny brush, like I'm going to get out some pretty small ones right now, and sticking out my tongue. You know what I'm talking about, right? Hiking up on the brush and forcing a blue bucket. Don't force a blue bucket, just allow a blue bucket. Here, let me bring you guys in just for a minute right before we end this broadcast. Get you in as close as I can so you can see what I'm doing, all right? And again, sorry for the bad feed, especially on Facebook. All right, so the light is clearly coming. Oh, there should be a handle on this bucket, shouldn't there? Every beach bucket has a handle. Which way? This way, yeah. It's not in the photograph. In the photograph, the handle is on the other side of the bucket, so that doesn't help me much. Now, if I fail to achieve bucketness, if I failed to achieve the feeling of a bucket with my first whack at it, then of course I must come back and do something to try to make it look like a bucket. But I hope you can tell by the way that I'm holding the brushes, the kind of brushes that I'm using, because I'm not using, where are they? You know, I'm not using a brush like this, right? A little soft filbert thing. I don't mean that. I mean a soft sable thing. Not using a little sable brush and sticking. Anyway, I am not doing that. I am instead using bristle brushes. When I first switched, when I first started doing oil painting, like many of you, I very much preferred sable brushes or synthetic soft brushes, right? Why? It's quite obvious to me now, because they do what they're told. They were easier to control. So I preferred sable brushes. It wasn't very long though before I discovered that that was actually a downside. There, beginning to look like a bucket. A bucket behind a few weeds, of course. In fact, I'll just use the brush that's in my hand. I'll just scratch through this a little bit, again, to try to give the impression. So I'll go do just a tiny bit on the dark side of this bucket. I was thinking about letting it, just the back side of it being a lost edge. I've changed my mind slightly. I'm going to do a little bit of the dark side of the bucket. Does that make sense? Let me back up now. Back you guys up. So there's just a little example of what I mean by real painting. You try to invent tools, movements, motions with your hand. You try to, and you focus more on the movements than you do on the realism. That's putting it kind of strongly. But that's pretty true. I'm more focused on the marks than I am on the similitude, if you will. It is paramount that the marks be interesting. All right, so there's a little focus of detail. The main point of this painting, of course, is going to be this girl, and that's going to be a very small portrait, but I'll tackle that when I start the next broadcast, okay? So I've got, the last 2 weeks I've been doing 5 portraits all at the same time. I finished last week's. I've got 5 new ones that I'm still in the early stages of doing the second batch of portraits. And I'd be glad to do yours, by the way. This is my coronavirus special, where I'm doing portraits for $350 per person. All right, thanks for watching. I bid you a fond adieu. As I said yesterday, bid you fondue. Hope you're doing well. Hope to talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.